It's David Fisher, Director and Founder of Immigration Chambers, Licensed Immigration Advisors for New Zealand and Australia. Specifically today, we're going to be talking about what happens if your visa is declined and what to do. So for here in New Zealand, we have different types of visas. We've got temporary visas and we have resident visas. So let's talk about both of them one at a time. Now, for temporary visas, you might have applied while you're onshore or while you're offshore. Okay, so first of all, if we talk about what happens when you're onshore. Now, it's going to depend on your circumstances at the time of the application. So if you have applied for a visa while you still hold a visa, right? In other words, you have a temporary visa, a visitor visa, student visa, work visa, and if your visa is declined while still holding that visa, you then have the right of reconsideration. Okay, so you have 14 days to submit a reconsideration request. That's the first option that you have, okay? A reconsideration request is not an appeal, okay? And it's not a new application. What a reconsideration request is essentially just a right that you have to ask immigration to review and look at the decision and look at the application again with fresh eyes. The application for a reconsideration must be submitted within 14 days, 14 calendar days. So that includes weekends. And the application will then be sent to a new immigration officer. The way to submit a reconsideration request is that you need to send a copy of your passport, a copy of the decision, and you need to submit any reasons why you feel that the application should be reconsidered. Now, this is quite important. If you simply send the application again and ask for a reconsideration, then there's most likely that nothing will happen. They'll look at it and they'll probably just decline it again. So you really need to outline what are the reasons why you would like them to reconsider it. So you need to point out any mistakes. For example, if INZ have omitted to consider certain aspects of the application. You need to point out any new documentation that perhaps you didn't submit with the first application, but you're submitting again. You need to point out a specific thing that you think immigration should particularly look at in your case. And you also need to pay a fee, so that's another thing you need to do. There's a reconsideration request fee, and just to let you know that immigration at their discretion can waive that fee if they agree to approve the reconsideration request. Now keep in mind that immigration still, it's the same application. They're gonna consider all the reasons for the decline, and so sometimes they won't necessarily wish to consider any new reasons or any change in circumstances. Okay, so they're looking at the existing decision, the existing application. But there's one thing that they can do, and that is they can consider, maybe the grant of a different type of visa. And in many cases, this is what has happened, that maybe they won't grant the initial work visa that you applied for, but if you've given satisfactory reasons why it should be reconsidered, maybe they'll consider something else, a visitor visa or something like that. Now, that's what happens if you still hold a visa for New Zealand. What happens if your visa has already expired? So you applied for your visa, let's say you applied on the 25th of April, and your current visa was expiring on the 1st of May, and then on the 5th of May, you received the decline decision. Now, first of all, what will have happened in most cases is that by the date of expiry of your visa, you will have received an interim visa. So an interim visa is something that bridges the time that you can remain lawfully in New Zealand while your application is being considered. So an interim visa will generally speaking, will be valid for 6 months from the date of granting of the visa, because assuming that an application is processed in due course, it'll take less than that to process. Or it will expire when you are granted the visa, so it disappears, you don't need it anymore, or 21 days after the decline. So if you receive that decline on the 5th of May, then 21 days from that date, the 26th of May, your interim visa will expire, and you would become unlawful at that point. So the reconsideration request is still available to you within 14 days because you hold a visa at the time. And the visa is an interim visa, but you still hold a valid visa, so you can submit that reconsideration request. The only thing to watch out for is that if you submit a reconsideration request within 14 days, you have only 7 days after that before your interim visa will expire. So there's a possibility that the reconsideration request will not be considered in time, which means you have a risk of becoming unlawful. And that is where you really should seek professional advice, because one thing that you really don't want to do is to become unlawful in New Zealand. Okay, but that is an option for you. You can submit that reconsideration request as long as you have that interim visa. In a case that you have not got an interim visa, so let's say, for example, like I mentioned before in the previous example, you submitted your application in April, your visa was expiring on the 1st of May, and so you got an interim visa. Now the interim visa is valid for 6 months. So from the 1st of May through to November, when that 6 months is coming up, you're lawful. But if your application has not been decided by that time, your interim visa could expire. Now, in many cases, immigration could consider the grant of another temporary visa. They have that option, they have that discretion to allow you to remain lawful. You should fight for that. But if you haven't been granted a further visa, you will become unlawful. So you're technically unlawful in the country. Now then, if your visa is declined, your application is declined while unlawful, unfortunately, you cannot submit a reconsideration request. Okay, so the reconsideration request is off the table. It's only allowed if you hold a visa in New Zealand. And the other case where a reconsideration request is not available is if you're offshore. So either if you're unlawful in New Zealand, or if you're offshore when you submitted your application, then the reconsideration request is not available.